Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and taking on a topic today that I'm really delighted to be involved with, and hopefully you can glean some good information about this, and maybe the Lord's kind of tugging on your heart to consider this. And we're going to be talking about hope for orphans and the whole subject of adoption. I am really honored to have with us today Dr. Jon Bergeron with us. He is a clinical psychologist, and he himself and his wife Shelley have adopted children, and he heads up the organization Hope for Orphans. And Dr. Jon, nice to have you, my friend. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm doing very well. It's great to be on your show.
Oh, thank you. Well, give us a little bit of a snapshot of Hope for Orphans.
I sure will. Hope for Orphans was actually started by our executive director, Paul Pennington, and his wife about 12 years ago. After their adoption, God really called them to want to send that message and that call out to churches, in their area. And so they started visiting churches and talking about God's heart for the orphan and how adoption is living the gospel, and it just really spread. And then about 10 years ago, we had the opportunity to come under Family Life Ministries, and they've really helped us to expand. And now, our goal is to serve orphans through serving the church and giving them the tools that they need to reach out to orphans, and through foster care and adoption and even international orphan care ministries.
So what pulled you into this? Here you are, a psychologist. What got you involved in this?
Well, the obvious answer is God. He called us into foster care, actually, initially, and my wife and I, really thought that God was calling us to just have foster kids in our home as long as they needed it, and then they would either be adopted or go back home, as the case indicated. But God really called us from there into adoption, and so we adopted one of the first kids that came to live with us, our son Tanner. And he also brought us into the whole world of special needs adoption. Both of our boys, Tanner and our older son, who we adopted 3 years ago from China, they're both deaf. And so God's given us a lot of different opportunities to serve and to get educated about foster care and adoption and orphan ministries. And then from that, God just really used those experiences to kind of prepare me for an opening with Hope for Orphans about a year and a half ago to come on as director of their FamilyCare initiative. Because what we were seeing is that a lot of families in the church had answered that call to adopt and to go into foster care, but it's tough. And there's some real specific skills that families need. And with my clinical background, I was able to begin serving some of those families and developing resources to help them.
Well, I think a lot of potential adoptive parents think about this and pray about this, but they just don't know all of the ins and outs. And also then you hear that actually at the end of the day it's quite difficult. Hopefully you can help them navigate through that.
Yeah, and that's why we put together this book we call Safe Harbor, which is a Christian's Guide to Foster Care.
Right.
We have a similar resource about adoption called Welcome Home. And the idea about these two resources is to give Christians, number one, a biblical understanding of God's heart and how much he values the vulnerable in our society, and especially the orphan and the fatherless. And from there, looking at what is the mandate that God puts on the church and us as Christians to answer that call, and how can we step up, and then giving some kind of, in these two resources, just some basics about what does it look like to adopt, and in Safe Harbor, what is the foster care system, how does it work, and how as Christians can we engage that and answer God's call to care for the orphan. How
do they get a copy of the Safe Harbor, Jon?
They can go on our website at hopefororphans.org, and there on the sidebar you'll see Safe Harbor. It's got a lighthouse on the front, and they can click on that and download that for free.
All right, it's called Safe Harbor, the Christian's Guide to Foster Care, and you may want to check that out there on their website. Jon, is it hard to adopt in the United States? Because we know a lot of people that go to foreign countries and adopt children. Is there similar hassles, or is it pretty much independent?
Well, if you're comparing international adoption with domestic adoption through the foster care system, it's actually a lot easier to adopt through the foster care system.
Okay.
One of the challenges is a lot of folks, when they initially go into adoption, are looking for infants, and those are harder there's not as many infants out there that need adoption, and there's a long line of people waiting. It's when we get into older kids and kids with special needs that actually the system makes it pretty easy and almost actually inexpensive, sometimes entirely free. We have the adoption tax credit that basically any fees that you put toward adoption, both at domestic and international, will to a certain extent will be you'll be able to get a tax credit for. Plus, with foster care, there's a lot of programs that actually help with the financial end of the piece. So for the vast majority of families, finances really shouldn't be an issue. Good. Especially when you're talking about domestic adoption.
Good. How big is this? How big is the need?
The need is pretty big. We've got around 400,000 kids in our foster care system. About 100,000 of those are waiting for homes to be adopted into. Wow. We hope in each case that kids can go back home, that whatever situation created the need for them to be removed can be improved and fixed, but that's not always the case. And about 100,000 kids right now are waiting and wanting a home and parents to take care of them.
Do you believe this is a calling for parents to get involved in?
I do. As I look through Scripture, it's very clear to me that God's desire for His people is that we're marked by a love for the fatherless, for the orphan, for the widow, for those in our society that are vulnerable. Right. And you see that throughout Scripture, both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. And you especially see it, in the prophet Isaiah, who talks about how grieved God's heart is when His people are not taking care of those orphans and the fatherless and treating them unfairly. And so I believe it's a core calling for the church, and one that we all need to participate in. Now, that doesn't mean we all need to become foster parents or adoptive parents, but there is a place for everyone to get involved. One of our most popular resources is called 10 Ways, and it's a little card that lists 10 different ways that you can get involved in caring for orphans, and only one of those is adoption. And so that's one of our messages too, is that this is for everybody. It's not just for the families that are called specifically to adoption and foster, but it's for all Christians that love their God and want to bring glory to Him.
Well, this is wonderful. And again, it's called Hope for Orphans, hopefororphans.org. Is that right, John?
That's correct.
And you can go there and check out the Safe Harbor Christian Guide to Foster Care. Click on that lighthouse icon there and download this guide free. So thank you for making that available. Back to your personal story, you and Shelley, and you have two boys that have hearing problems or that are deaf. Yes. That's an extra challenge. And how did you know that when you adopt them, or how did that come about?
Well, that's an interesting story that I love to tell, because it's part of how God led us into a place we never imagined. We got licensed as foster parents, and my wife got a call from a caseworker that said, "Hey, we've got two kids ready that need a home, and we'd love to see if you guys would take them." And the first answer was that, well, we kind of agreed to one kid, so we're not sure about this two-kid thing. And then she said, "Oh, and the little boy, he's deaf." And my wife's like, "Well, neither of us know how to sign or anything about deafness." And the caseworker said, "Well, that's okay. He doesn't know how to sign either," which shocked us, because we thought, well, somebody needs to know how to communicate.
You're right.
So, but we really, we prayed about it and talked to, God about this, and it was clear to us that He wanted these kids in our home. And so from that point forward, we all learned sign language, and we learned about deafness and deaf education and deaf culture. And it's been just an amazing blessing, even though it's been challenging at times too.
At what point, as you as a foster parent, emotionally get pulled into the adoption arena?
Well, any parent knows that as you take care of a child, your heart just becomes connected with that child. Right. And in some cases, as a foster parent, you have to say goodbye, and that's tough. We did experience that with one of our foster children. But as we did that, we realized that there are some kids, like our son Tanner, who would not be safe if he went home. And so he needed a home, and the system kind of did their part in terms of making it possible that we could adopt him. And it was kind of a no-brainer at that point. It was just very clear to us that that's what God wanted us to do.
All right. In closing, Jon, what can you say to that couple that's been kind of thinking about this, and they kind of maybe sensing the Lord leading them in this direction? What can you say to them to encourage them to go ahead and investigate it?
I'd say a couple of things. I think the most important thing, obviously, is to be praying about it, and most Christian couples are, and be listening to what God's really calling you to do, because He may have given you a heart to care for these kids, but it may not be adoption or foster care, and it's important to listen to that. Secondly, I think part of that listening is educating yourself a little bit about what does foster care entail and adoption, and in terms of the different kinds of kids that might come in our home. Are we equipped? And if we're not, can we, get the education and the resources we need to help kids that might come into our home? And I think through that process of prayer and educating yourself, God will be faithful and give you the answer you're looking for.
Well, this is really inspiring, and you are a great spokesman for the cause. It's called Hope for Orphans. You may want to check it out, hopefororphans.org. And when you're there, look for the lighthouse icon, click on that, and you can download free a little booklet called Safe Harbor, A Christian's Guide to Foster Care. Jon, thank you, my friend. Keep up the good work, and keep us posted, okay?
Thanks, Perry. It's been a pleasure.
All right, God bless. We'll be right back.